Welcome back to Small College Conversations. I'm Jim Abbott. I'm the founder of the Business of Small College Athletics. And today I'm joined by Jake Daugherty. Jake is the manager of Collegiate Partnerships for Opendorse. Jake, thanks so much for your time today.
Jim, absolutely. Big fan of the program. So honored to be on the show and excited to have a conversation with you today.
Well, we're grateful to have you. We're grateful to have Opendorse. Jake, we're 4 years into NIL now, which seems kind of crazy to me, but time does fly. And so 4 years in, what's the state of small college NIL today?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most interesting part that I've seen, right? So a little bit about my background. I was a D2 former student athlete and then worked in administration in the D2 Division I realm, coached a little bit in the NAI space. And so I've really been able to see a lot of different lenses, whether it's an athlete lens, an administrator lens, and then now in my role working with ADs, presidents from all over non-Division I schools across the nation. What we've seen is very much significant growth in the area of NIL. So I would argue when I first joined Opendorse, probably about 3 years ago, that first year of NIL, a lot of the conversation and question was, hey, is NIL for us? Like, what does NIL look like at the D2, D3, NAI, NJCAA level, right? And so there was a lot of kind of skepticism and maybe even questions around, does this really impact us? And so as time's progressed, I would say just like anything, the people that are leading the pack jump on early and say, hey, let's dive in. Let's see what that looks like. And so early on, you saw a lot of more commercial NIL. So when we talk about today, there's 3 C's, right? There's college NIL, which is the Division I rev share that you've been reading about. There's commercial NIL and there's collective NIL. And so that commercial NIL piece really early on has played a big role in that non-Division I space. But as we've progressed, you're talking about collectives growing in that space, in that Division II, Division III, and now even NAI, NJCAA space. And so more people are asking questions around, hey, what are we doing with NIL? More athletes who are getting recruited are saying, what does NIL look like on your campus? And more ADs and coaches and administrators are having to get knowledgeable around what is happening in space from a realistic standpoint. So we've seen from a numbers standpoint, it's been cool to see. I think when I first joined, there was maybe, less than 40-ish schools that worked with Opendorse. And now as we sit here with 120 plus, we've done over $1.5 million in NIL deals through the platform with non-Division I athletes. So the highlight there, Jim, is it's $1 million market in small college NIL, and I'm excited to see the next iteration and evolution of it.
Yeah, well, it's $1 million today and only growing.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked a little bit about collectives at the small college level. So how have collectives how have they grown and maybe evolved?
Yeah, so I would say when I sat on a panel at the Division II for a Division II panel at the NCAA conference here, and I would say a lot of people were asking the question around what is a collective, right? So first and foremost, you're talking about a party that is created, a business that's created outside of the university that's helping generate funds to do deals back with that institution, okay? And so a lot of times people would say, the comments I heard were, hey, we don't have a collective, so we don't have NIL here. So there's kind of been this correlation early on of you have to have a collective to do NIL, which isn't true. But now, as we've seen over time, more alumni are asking the question to Jake Daugherty or Jim to say, hey, you're the AD at this school. What are we doing with NIL? How do I get involved? I have a business or I want to contribute. And so that conversation over time has grown. And so early on, I think a lot of people stayed away from collectives at the small college level. Versus now what we're seeing is this really large growth in people saying, hey, we want to have the best insert team or the best insert program in all of Division II, III, NAI, or NJCAA. How do we do this? How do we do this right? And how do we help create an opportunity that's going to help us retain athletes to stay here so we can help build winning programs? So that collective piece in the small college space continues to grow, and that conversation continues to grow too amongst ADs, presidents, donors, you name it. So it's been fun to see and be a part of.
And so you mentioned the collective is external to the institution. Is that always the case?
Yep. So what those collectives are doing is they're working and sometimes there's state laws that help athletic departments work hand in hand with those collectives too. But yeah, those collectives are starting their own business, their own LLC. They're generating funds, operating completely on their own, and then working with those athletes that they're a collective for that institution.
And so in that case, when they're working with those athletes, they're hiring those athletes for some specific purpose. Is that right?
Yep. Quid pro quo will always exist, right? So they're going to have them come do meet and greets on behalf of the collective or social media posts. So there's always going to be an activity tied to whatever involvement or activity and deal that they're doing with those athletes.
Okay, so belief versus priority.
Mm-hmm.
Where should administrators begin when they're approaching NIL?
Yeah, so this is, when I first started, the number one thing I would hear is, we don't have NIL here, or we don't believe in NIL. And that comment, copy and pasted across hundreds of conversations. And so one thing that I feel like has been a really good guiding star for ADs is understanding what is our belief around NIL, and is it a priority for us? Because I empathize with ADs to say, hey, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, this conversation you couldn't have, right? It felt taboo, it was illegal, right? You couldn't do it from a compliance standpoint. But as we fast forward in today's world, this is a conversation you really need to look in the mirror and say, hey, is our department doing everything we can to at least be educated and make an educated decision on NIL? So what I mean by that is take a look at your department and say, what is our belief around NIL for our student athletes? And it could be, hey, our belief is we love this. We think it's a great opportunity for them, but it's not a priority for us. We want to build buildings or grow out our sponsorship program or whatever that may be. You will know that better than anybody. But then on the opposite side, you might say, hey, I'm an old school AD. I hate NIL. This is ruining athletics, but it is a priority for us. We have to be able to retain athletes. We keep losing recruits. We keep losing potential athletes. So how do we make this a priority for our department? And I always say that's the best guiding star and the starting point for an AD to say, hey, what's our belief on this? And is it a priority for us? And then from there, you'll be able to make the educated decisions on how do you build out a program and everything that comes following that.
It's interesting. Just in these first few minutes, I just think back to, where I was as an administrator, and so many things that you've said already resonate with where I was. And in terms of initially, I thought, we'll probably won't participate in this. Sort of the old school mentality of, this aura of higher education that, hey, you're getting an education. What more do you need? And I think the reality is that belief is malleable in this case, and it will become a priority. So I think the next step of this is, with any sort of change in thought comes some need for policy. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing there in terms of athletic departments creating policies to sort of govern their actions in this area?
Yeah. So Jim, before I answer that, I want to share something that someone said to me. It really stuck with me because I know ADs and commissioners and presidents and people watch your show. So someone said to me, when it comes to NIL, a lot of times people will say, hey, we don't want any part of it. Like you said, when you were an AD, would we even get into this? And I want to say, think of social media and branding 10, 15 years ago, and think about someone coming to you and saying, hey, in 5, 10 years from now, you're going to hire in a complete department only for branding, social media, streaming, you name it, right? You'd be like, you're crazy. We're not going to hire a full-time staff member to just do social media. Now, fast forward, those departments are building out those jobs. Small college departments are even building out social media, SIDs, assistant SIDs. Like, that job is transformed. NIL is going to be that same way as we continue to grow and evolve, right? So I always want to say that because that resonated with me of like, yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. On the policy side, to your point, a lot of times people don't even know what kind of state laws exist for them. So something that I always say that it seems that people understand is, the ADs are waiting to hear from a federal standpoint and a state law standpoint. Then they make their decision that then gets sent to the athletes. But if you flip it around, athletes are waiting to hear from administrators. So it's this waiting game happening that's unique to see. But administrators really should be looking at what is our state law? Like if you boiled it down to, all right, what do I need to know? What is our state law? What does it say? If it says anything, right? Some are vague, some are more strict, but understanding what does our state say? And then taking that to your team internally and saying, hey, here's our state law, but what do we think as an institution? Is there anything we want to make sure that we're protected on, or any procedures or policies that we need? Because if you can do those two things, you're already going to be far ahead of most institutions and people. And that costs you $0, right? It doesn't cost you any money to look at what is our state law and build a policy. And then from there, that is where you really get to decide on making sure your athletes know, hey, what do we need to know as athletes and coaches and administrators to make sure we're always being compliant and staying above the table on this. So, for example, some administrators don't know that your state may say, we require so much education around financial literacy. And so you might be operating in the dark there, right? And so that's what I mean by understanding what's happening from a state law standpoint in the state you're in, and then taking that, talking with your team internally and saying, hey, let's make sure we're protected and we have guidelines and policies to help.
And Jake, I'm thinking this is where Opendorse probably comes in. Is it possible that 50 states have 50 different approaches to this?
Yeah. I mean, it ranges state to state, right? So, and you're seeing that now when you see some states pass laws around revenue sharing. You see some states passing laws around taxability on NIL income earnings. Like each state is different in that. And I know the powers that be are all working on those things, but that's what I would say is, as an administrator, understand those state laws that you're in, because to your point, Jim, there are unique nuances with each state. So every state's not the same.
So I can't call my buddy in Michigan and say, send me your policy, because what happens in Oklahoma might be slightly different than the laws of Michigan. It's so fascinating to me, because states rushed to pass laws and then only to realize we've put ourselves at a competitive disadvantage because this other state allows, something entirely different. And so, it just continues to evolve, I suppose. So, okay. You mentioned something earlier, and I kind of wanted to get back to it. You said that you're $1.5 million in deals at small colleges and universities. So what's that process look like? If I'm Jim Abbott, junior pitcher on the baseball team at Ferris State University, what does it look like when I sign an NIL deal?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously that's why Opendorse exists as a company and why we're doing that in the space. But in simple terms, the issue that we solve as a company, but also that it's a problem in the space, is accessibility when it comes to small college, right? So to your point, if let's say a local car dealership wanted to work with Jim Abbott as a pitcher, they need to know, hey, how do I get in touch with Jim? How do I work with Jim? What is Jim charging? Who writes the contract? Who's paying that out? Do all of that process. So soup to nuts, right? Like from front to back. And that is where that process, those businesses are getting involved with those athletes through Opendorse and our partners. And then they're being able to work with them, and we're helping guide them through that process. But in reality, it's those athletes saying, hey, yep, I want to do that deal with that dealership, right? And I want to go appear in a commercial, or I want to work with this local restaurant and do post on behalf of them, right? One of the coolest ones I saw was a NJCAA school in North Carolina. Each one of their athletes on the basketball program had an opportunity to participate in a dealership's commercial, right? A local car dealership, the college is the main attraction in town. And so that dealership said, hey, we'd love to help these athletes as they're on their way and developing and getting ready for the next step of their life, and give them opportunity to partake in this, right? And then use those athletes' social media following to help enhance their business. People are looking to buy cars. And so that is where that business, getting in touch with those athletes, using Opendorse to do it, we've solved that accessibility problem. But then that's where those businesses are being able to work with those athletes and have comfort in knowing, hey, we're doing things the right way. The school knows everything's compliant. And that process, that's what I mean by that 1.5 million. More opportunities and people getting involved to work with athletes.
And every one of those agreements is, maybe not everyone, but they're all different.
Yep.
Sometimes getting hired could be 25, $50, right? Or a pair of shoes, or whatever, a coupon for free fill in the blank. And sometimes that could be much more significant in terms of the dollars. Is that fair to say?
Completely. Yeah, I talked with a woman whose daughter plays volleyball at a Division II school, and she was telling me that her daughter does social media posts for a local chain restaurant in their community, and in return, she does the post, and they give her credits towards a free meal each week, right?
Yeah.
So, as much as we talk about dollars in the space, there is opportunities for trade or goods and services to help offset those costs of just being a college student, right?
Yeah, good. I'm, personally, I would just find it fun trying to negotiate. The hard part is gaining the interest of some of these businesses, because in many cases, the business has some affiliation or fondness for the institution, I would think in most cases. But anyway, I really celebrate the entrepreneurialness of the whole process.
Yeah, spot on. I saw a commercial, and obviously I'm not biased here, but Ferris State did a local opportunity with a burger joint in town, and I grew up there. And it's a place called Schuberg's, and they starred Ferris State athletes, men, women, all different sports, cooking meals, serving, and it was this fun, interactive opportunity. And so these athletes now are sharing that on their social media platform. The community sees this burger place supporting athletes, and it's a win-win for everybody, right? Athletes did those deals, the business working with the athletes to show they're committed to the community. And then those athletes following in that audience and that community is now tapped in to what they're sharing and growing their following. So it's the most beautiful example I've seen of a commercial opportunity at the D2 level impacting a community, but also a department as well, which is fun to see.
Well, shout out to our buddy Steve Brocklebank. And I see your Ferris jerseys proudly displayed on your wall behind you. So anyway, all right. We talked about belief and policy, and it sort of seems like the next part of this has got to be education. How do departments educate athletes and staff and even stakeholders about NIL?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, that's one thing we do. That's the backbone of our company, right? And so if schools are ever interested in that, they can reach out to us. But let me put myself in the seat of an AD to say, Jake, I got no budget, right? I need to figure out how I get my athletes educated, my coaches educated, but I can't afford a third party to come help us do that. Well, I would say, first and foremost, think about cross-campus collaborative partnerships, right? I would argue most schools have a business school, or most schools have a sports management program or a marketing program. So it's a great opportunity to go across campus and say, hey, what opportunities would there be for you guys to help run, workshops or opportunities with our athletes to talk about what's happening in the market, right? Or there's opportunities to follow different newsletters, like the NIL Blitz is a great one. And there's just free opportunities out there if you're looking on social media to get educated. And I would always tell ADs, like, take the time to just know enough to be dangerous. You don't have to know all the ins and outs, but understanding what is our policies, right? What does the state say? What are we hearing from colleagues across the space? And then looking internally to say, hey, what are those campus partnerships that we could do to help talk about brand building, talking about, hey, how do we leverage our opportunities here and our resources here that cost us $0 and help get our athletes educated? And then obviously those are things that we do. But when we come to campus, primarily we're talking about how to position yourself as a department, as a coach, as an athlete, and really maximize this opportunity. Because when you're an athlete and you're playing a sport at any level at the small college space, your jokes are funnier. People want to listen to you. People are engaged with what you're doing. So make the most of it, right? If you're an athlete and you have an opportunity to see this, like, take the time to reach out, and figure out what kind of businesses in your brand that you want to work with. So it's one of the best times to be an athlete, and it's the best time for a coach to get educated to say, how do we talk about NIL in a positive light? Because this is what high schoolers coming out of college are going to be asking about, is what NIL opportunities exist. What opportunities have you guys done before? And so equipping your staff and leaders to understand what that looks like is a great opportunity as an AD to say, hey, we're trying to future-proof our athletic department.
It's interesting. This still exists, but to some extent, as you're recruiting, it's about, who has better facilities, who offers me more scholarship, who has the major that I want to pursue. And this is certainly part of that competitive cycle is either you embrace it or you don't. If you don't, you got to understand that you're going to be crossed off a lot of lists in that case.
Yep. Yeah, Jim, to that point earlier, it's about that belief and priority, right? If you're okay with the recruit coming in and you telling them like, we have really good facilities, this program for you and this scholarship, but at the end of the day, NIL is not a priority for us here. That's your obligation as a leader to say these are our priorities and this is what we're leaning into. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're the CEO of your department, so you make that decision, and just know that that's on that scale of that belief and priority around NIL.
Well, yeah, and lots of people have nice facilities and a good tradition and the major that I want to study. And when I think about the education piece of this and just the management, it really makes me understand and embrace the idea that we will see full-time people, or more likely at our level, it would be someone who oversees NIL and, some other area. But when I'm thinking about me as an athletic director, I knew that I didn't have the expertise or the time to really give something like this justice. Similar to the fact that I have a full-time compliance person and a full-time external person. So that will be very interesting to see. And I predict BOSCA events into the future will always have some NIL related topic to discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say, as we talk about education, like the people that watch this too, think about there are so many different levels of it as a leader, as you go into like the Division II conversation around, developing brand and using NIL is so different than the conversation at an NAIA or an NJCAA school. So as leaders are progressing through their careers or taking new opportunities, understand that NIL conversation is different at each level.
What's really interesting is that there's certainly this channel of information, and a lot of it is misconstrued or hearsay, or I've even heard in some cases students that are maybe communicating that I have such and such an offer at such and such a school, and either meet it or I'm going to go there. Are you seeing this happen on a sort of a wide scale in terms of just the amount of information that may or may not be true that's being passed around?
Yeah, I think the hearsay part of NIL is the one that I would encourage people to really dive deep into, ask the question of like, who is the source saying it? Is it a credible source? Because I've heard everything under the sun from, my sister's husband's brother's cousin said his nephew got this. And so what I would argue though is really dive into, okay, what are your colleagues saying? Or if they're not saying anything, who are credible sources in the markets talking about NIL? What are they telling you? Because that's where, I've heard everything from there's Division II's offering $50,000 to $100,000 worth of deals. And as someone who works with Division II's, I can promise you that that's not the case, right? A lot of times at each level, we're talking about in the small college space, retention. How do we retain quality athletes? They're not out there putting together these really nice, expensive recruiting packages. What they're trying to say is, how do we retain our quality athletes that are trying to leave and go to the next level? And so, yeah, I would always encourage people, the hearsay piece of the business in the industry, that's where a lot of times people take it verbatim and take it as concrete evidence instead of taking a deeper look and saying, well, I don't know how credible that is. Let's dive deeper into understanding what is realistically happening in space and what do that numbers and the data tell us from sources that are doing that on a day-to-day basis.
it makes a ton of sense. Whether folks are really going to be forthcoming with some of that information is, is hard to understand. Jake, I've seen schools maybe on social media announce that they're going to have NIL deals for every one of their student athletes. Is that something that is prevalent? Is that a trend that you see people trying to follow?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and if you boil it down, what they're trying to show is that, hey, we're forthcoming in this, and right, we have the forethought and be a thought leader, and we're providing opportunities for all of our athletes, because as we know, as young people, they're consuming that content. They're going to the website. They're seeing the Twitter headline or the X headline to say, Jake Daugherty, the AD at this school, is saying that there's NIL deals for all these athletes. I need to, if they're on my list, I need to reach out to that coach or maybe get recruited by him, right? So yes, I mean, that you're going to see more and more development at the commercial level when we talk about NIL in small college, the collective level. And there's even been talks around getting a feel for what does institutional NIL look like at the small college level, right? So the idea that maybe a school could do an NIL deal with an athlete and use their social media to further their brand. So that is where, you're going to see that more and more of how do we separate ourselves and be a program that really dives into NIL and can show that from a national lens.
Well, that will be a future conversation. I could definitely see an institution understanding it, and it goes back to retention, among other things. But I could definitely see an institution getting engaged and trying to fund some of this. We already do it in a variety of other ways. This just continues that with maybe a little different definition of what the funding is and what it's for. All right, one final question. I'm kind of backtracking this here for this final question, but if a coach or an AD is asked what NIL opportunities exist at your school, what should the response be?
Yeah, so that's an internal call, right? And I ask that question all the time. And if you don't have an answer to that question, my advice is make sure you have a answer to it, because I've been in rooms and say, let's say I want to work with your shortstop. I got a $10,000 opportunity for him right now. What's your answer? Like, how do I get a deal to that shortstop? And when the kind of the palms are up and it's like, I have no idea. That's one of the things that you, as a department, as a leader, as a coach, whoever you are, like understanding I need to have an answer and know when those opportunities come up, how do we maximize them? Because I've seen time and time again where coaches and ADs say, hey, we're going to ignore this. We're going to shelf it. We're going to keep our head in the sand. And they maybe lose out on those opportunities versus other ADs that are saying, or coaches say, yep, no problem. Here's our process. This is how we do it. Or here's who we work with. Like being able to have an answer to that and have confidence and having confidence in knowing it is the difference between maybe retaining your best player or maybe having an opportunity that benefits an athlete long after their time as a student athlete. So the question that they should be asking themselves is, do we have an answer for when that comes up? Because that's going to be a question that's going to continue to be asked of them in the recruiting process of insert school. What does NIL opportunities look like there? Or what do you guys do for NIL? And so I would always encourage people, make sure you have that answer. And if you don't, that's one of those things, do some research, reach out to us. Like those are things that we help with. But as a leader, you should always have an answer around what NIL opportunities exist, even if the answer is NIL is not a priority for us or NIL is a priority for us. And this is how it goes.
Yeah. Again, that's one more reason why I want a full-time person dealing with it, because you're right. You have to have an answer. There's no avoiding it anymore, in my opinion. Even the answer being, we don't believe in it is not going to be good for your institution long term, in my opinion.
Yep.
Well, Jake, man, I can't thank you enough. This is fascinating. I am grateful that Opendorse is involved with BOSCA primarily so that we can continue to try to educate people and keep that word out there. And I really am thankful for your friendship and the great work that you do. So thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, absolutely, Jim. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Love working with BOSCA and love continuing to work with small college administrators. So if anyone's ever interested to, learn more about what we're doing, feel free to reach out to us, and excited to see the growth in this space. It's been so fun to be a part of, and excited to see the next iteration of it over the next couple of years.
It's only going to continue to grow and evolve. And again, my thanks to Jake Daugherty for his time today. And I hope that you'll join us again for our next small college conversation.